This is the story of a pilot who crashed his plane for no reason. He walked away from the wreckage with a few injuries, and he couldn't explain why he did what he did. Let's fly into it. On December 2003, a single-engine propeller-driven Columbia 400 was flying through heavy fog near Houston, Texas. The plane had flown out of Harlingen just south of the border of Mexico and was headed to Conroe, Texas, which is about an hour north of Houston. There was only one person in the plane, the owner and also the pilot of the aircraft. And this pilot was a very experienced pilot. He had earned his private pilot's license way back in 1971 and had accumulated over 18,000 hours of flight time by the time he died at the age of 64. Before takeoff, the pilot checked the weather at both airports and the weather along his route. And although there were some areas of low clouds and fog, the pilot decided that the weather was good enough and that he could make the trip. Once he was airborne, the pilot kept in contact with air traffic control as he flew what they call an airway, which is basically a pre-planned route that pilots use that takes them from one navigational point to another. These airways have waypoints or checkpoints that pilots must fly by and maintain a certain altitude while they reflying between these points. About 30 minutes after takeoff, the pilot requested to descend below his assigned altitude because he wanted to avoid some of the cloud cover. Air traffic control let him do that, since he was well below the minimum altitude for the area. At this point, the pilot was probably thinking that he had made the right decision to go out and fly today. The weather was abnormally clear and he was avoiding all of the nasty stuff. But things started to take a turn when the pilot continued to descend lower and lower and lower. He went from 4,000 feet down to 2,000 feet, and then down to 1,200 feet. So they contacted the plane and asked him to climb. The pilot responded to the controller, but his response was garbled and not coherent. I guess that the pilot was having some kind of issue, because he didn't respond back right away. And when he did, he said something like, "It's not going to work. Tell my wife I love her." What? Did I miss something? Why is he talking about his wife? What's going on? This is where the controller started to get really worried. They knew that something was wrong. But before they could say anything else to the pilot, he cut off his radio. No, that's not right. The pilot actually turned off the radio. Like he physically got up, went over to the radio, turned it off like he was trying to hide from air traffic control. Now, obviously, the controller thought that something really bad was going on here. So they quickly contacted the nearest airport and told them to get ready for an emergency landing. Then they tried to get in contact with the pilot again, but their calls were not answered. That's when the controller knew that something was really wrong. So they dispatched 2 F-15s to go chase down the pilot and see if everything was okay. The F-15s found the plane about 45 miles east of Houston. The pilots reported that the plane was in a straight and level flight at 500 feet. It was slow, and it appeared to be under the pilot's control. But still, this was very unusual behavior for a pilot to be doing in this area. At this point, the controllers lost visual contact with the plane. They tried to get the pilot's attention again, but there was still no response. So the F-15s were diverted to try to land the pilot in at an airport. The F-15s approached the plane and tried to guide it toward the airport, but the pilot of the plane seemed intent on continuing his current path. When the F-15 got close enough to the plane, they saw that the pilot was slumped over in his seat and that the plane was completely empty. Oh, so the pilot wasn't even in the plane. Wait, no. He was in the plane, but he was unconscious. I don't know how to explain that. Anyway, the F-15s stayed with the plane for almost an hour, keeping it in the air and guiding it over toward the airport until the plane ran out of gas. When the plane finally did land, it landed hard and it skidded across the runway. The plane eventually came to a stop and the F-15s landed as well. Emergency crews rushed to the plane to check on the pilot, but sadly, the pilot was pronounced dead at the scene. As they looked around the plane, they found out that the cause of the crash was unknown. They examined the wreck extensively, but nothing stood out as a cause of the accident. And none of the systems on the plane gave any indication as to what might have caused the crash. It was later determined that the plane was worth about $2 million, which raises the question, why would a multimillionaire willingly crash his plane? Now, as far as we know, the pilot was a wealthy man. He owned several oil companies, and he was part of an exclusive group of pilots who owned and flew these kinds of planes. He was also highly respected by the people in his community. He was described as a generous man who was always willing to lend a hand. He was also a devoted husband, father, and grandfather. He was a pillar of the community. So why would someone like this crash their plane? The investigators interviewed the pilot's family and friends to try to find out if there was anything that might have caused the pilot to do something like this. His widow said that he had no reason to crash the plane. She said that he loved flying and that he was very proud of his plane. He had even taken it to an air show just a week before the accident. She also said that he had no history of mental illness or suicidal ideation. His friends and neighbors all said the same thing. They said that he was a happy and healthy man who had no reason to end his life. So why did he do it? The investigators were stumped. They couldn't think of anything that would cause a pilot to intentionally crash his plane. So they brought in a psychologist to see if maybe they could come up with an answer. The psychologist reviewed all of the evidence, including the pilot's medical records, and they came up with a few possibilities. The first was that the pilot had some kind of psychotic break. But again, his medical records showed no signs of this. Another possibility was that the pilot was suffering from some kind of depression. But again, his medical records showed no signs of this either. The psychologist concluded that there was nothing in the pilot's past that would cause him to do something like this. At the end of the day, the investigators were never able to determine why the pilot crashed his plane. It was ruled as a probable accident, which means that the cause of the accident is unknown. To this day, nobody knows why the pilot crashed his plane. The last words that he said to air traffic control were, "It's not going to work." But we don't know what he was referring to. Was he referring to his marriage? Was he sick, and was he aware that he was going to die? Was he sick and didn't know that he was going to die? No. The truth is that we may never know why this pilot crashed his plane. But what we do know is that he was a successful businessman, a loving husband, and a great friend. He will be missed by all who knew him. Thank you for watching this episode. If you like the videos that I make, do me a favor and hit the like button. I'm just trying to build my channel, and your support would be greatly appreciated. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you think the pilot was thinking when he crashed his plane. If you want to watch another video, click on one of the 2 videos that are on your screen right now. And remember, don't be stressed. Fly safe. Welcome to my channel. Today, we will be looking at a wing-over-wing plane crash. On October 2006, an Embraer EMB 120 Brasilia twin-engine turboprop was en route from Allahabad to Lucknow. The aircraft departed Allahabad at 13:45 UTC, and the flight was expected to arrive in Lucknow at 15:05 UTC. But due to weather conditions, pilots decided to divert to the Lucknow airport. They canceled their IFR flight plan and entered the pattern to land at the airport. As the plane approached the airport, it was in contact with Lucknow ATC. At 14:58 UTC, the controller asked the pilots of Brazil Echo Lima November Golf to descend down to 2,000 feet, as they were getting close to the airport. A few moments later, the pilots said that they were almost at the decision height and requested the controller for a missed approach, as they were not able to visually identify the runway. The controller then instructed them to climb right turn to 2,000 feet and then left, turn back to the final approach course heading. Then he cleared them for a Cat 1 approach to runway 27 at Lucknow. They performed a Cat 1 approach and made several attempts to land on runway 27 at Lucknow. The airplane was vectored off, and then the airplane was asked to go around. And after the go-around, the pilots once again asked for a Cat 1 approach to runway 27.